everyone, it's James, and here's something I hear around the proverbial internet water cooler fairly often. And it goes something like, I really want to buy an Echo or some other kind of RV, but that cassette toilet is a deal breaker for me. And I get it, because we used to be in that same camp.
We will never, ever own a cassette toilet in an RV. I'm saying that now.
I guess never say never, right? Well, anyway, since now Winnebago includes a cassette toilet in a number of their models. There's the Solus PX, the Solus National Park Foundation Edition, the Revel Sport, the Roam, and our own Winnebago Echo, which we've had now for going on 5 years. And in that time, I've come around to the cassette toilet, as has literally everyone else who's ever bought one of those RVs. In fact, I can say I am not aware of any person who has bought an RV and then sold it just because they couldn't come to grips with that cassette toilet. So since we had 5 years with a regular RV black tank, we had 5 years with a composting toilet, and now we're coming up on 5 years with our cassette toilet, I thought I'd make this video to kind of give you the basics of the cassette toilet if you're on the fence, right? To give you the basics of the cassette toilet and to talk about some of the main objections to the cassette toilet and how you might want to think about them in order to get you over the hump. So let's do it. Okay, it's hard in a small space to get a good shot of this, but this is the cassette toilet. Now I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that this part of the cassette toilet is not the part that makes people nervous, because I mean, come on, it's a toilet, right? We've all seen toilets. There are a few things you'll need to know about the cassette toilet. First, this right here is the lever to flush the toilet, and it does not spring back like a foot pedal does. You know, you have to open it and then close it. Okay, fine. This right here is a little dial indicator. It goes from green to red as the cassette fills up with waste. So that's your tank level monitor, I suppose. And then back here is a button to fill the bowl with water. Now you will want to fill the bowl with water before adding any solid waste. Okay, that's not but the one thing you will want to be sure of is that you have either the lid closed or at least the seat down before you press this button, because depending on how strong your pump is, it can be a little forceful and it gets a little over exuberant, a little splashy. But that's the inside part, probably not what you're worried about. What you're worried about is probably outside. So let's have a look at that. And in here is the cassette. Now this is the part that most people are concerned with, and this is also what makes it most different from a traditional RV black tank. In this setup with a cassette toilet, the waste tank removes, but the RV stays put. Now that can be kind of an advantage, because it means you don't have to break camp and drive the RV somewhere and try to line up the back of it with a little hole in the ground in order to dump. Another thing I want you to notice is that this is installed above the floor in the heated space of the RV, and that gives it a huge advantage for winter camping. You don't need tank heaters, you don't need water lines running alongside or anything like that. It just, as long as you don't freeze, it's not going to freeze. So let's go inside and we'll look at some of the parts of this. And this is the cassette. Now this one's from a Thetford C220 toilet. Other models of toilet may be different shape, but they're all going to have the same basic features. And so let's talk about those. First, this one and most cassettes, they hold about 5 gallons of liquid. So keep that in mind, that'll come up later. Now, they've all got a number of things on them. Like, remember that float, that indicator dial we saw inside that goes from green to red? That's based off of a float. And that float works here, and there's a magnet in here, and this is what will make the dial turn from green to red. So there's that. This is a vent, needed to vent the toilet. Now there is a sliding cover that is over. If you look down inside the toilet, you'll see that. The sliding cover, you don't really ever have to mess with it much, because it goes back on when you pull the cassette out, and it removes itself when you put the cassette back in. But there's a cover, and then this, I'll just take this out for now. This, when you move that handle on the inside, it is going to turn this dial, which opens or closes the cassette. And again, most of the time that will be on. Now, this little button is something you can press to let air into the cassette. You will need to do that when you dump so that you don't get, this weird glug, glug, glug action, right? So it pours out smoothly. Word of advice: do not hit this button until you've got it like up in the air like this, because if you have the button up like that, then stuff's going to come out the button on your hand, and you really don't want that, right? So that's the button. It's a pressure valve to let air in, but wait until you're emptying the cassette to actually hit it. Now, cassettes will all have a spout and a cap, and this is where you're going to remove the waste. And we'll get to that in a little minute. And then they all also have wheels, as you can see here, and a handle. And they have this because, when it's full, this cassette can weigh like 30 to 40 pounds, and maybe you don't necessarily want to have to hoof that all the way across the campground by yourself, so we've got wheels. So let's get into some of the objections that I hear to a cassette toilet. And before we get too deep into that, I just want to say that every RV toilet system has its pluses and minuses, and we've used them all, and they've all got good points and bad points, because at some point they're all dealing with human waste. You're going to have to deal with that at some point in some way. Now, it may be as minor as rinsing out a sewer hose, right? Or it could be that the previous RVer to the dump station didn't meet your standards of hygiene, let's say, and you've got that to work around while you're trying to dump. But at some point, there's going to be some part of the process that's not going to be your favorite part of the day, right? So with that perspective, let's talk about dumping the cassette. Now, the way you dump a cassette, and the reason people are concerned about it, is because it's basically a free pour, right? You just pour the cassette like that, and there will be a stream of effluent coming out of there, right? And so you will get the sights, the sounds, the smells of a stream of effluent. It's not great, but fortunately, the cassette is only 5 gallons, so it's over with pretty quickly. Now, in Europe, where literally 100% of the RVs are cassette toilets, they have like these special ways to dump. It's like a big funnel, a yard square, and you just you don't even have to aim really. You just, it's 5 gallons, you're over out of there in 20 seconds. Here, we have the little 3-inch holes in the ground, right? So if you want to dump the cassette toilet in a way that you are familiar with, some genius came up with the Americanizer. Okay, it was me. And the way this works is you slide it on here, and you tighten it on. Come on. There we go. And now it's got lugs on it, and you can dump the same way you've always dumped with a sewer hose. So if you were worried about having to dump a cassette free pour, you don't have to. You can dump it just like you dump a regular RV, right? But even though I invented this thing, I don't use it all the time to dump. I use it some of the time, sure. But there are other ways, there are a whole lot more options besides just the RV sewer dump that you can use to dump a cassette. My absolute favorite would be like a vault toilet or a pit toilet off in the woods at like a trailhead or a small campground somewhere. Basically, it's a hole and it's 30 feet down to whatever, and they never smell all that great to begin with, so you're in there and it's just like using the restroom, right? It's over with pretty quickly. You can also dump them in like porta-johns, like at a construction site or at a festival. In fact, when Winnebago rallies happen and there are a lot of RVs that use cassette toilets, they'll bring in porta-johns and use them to dump your RV's cassette. That's pretty easy too. You can also dump them in a home toilet or a regular flush toilet. You just have to be a little careful while you're dumping. You don't want to go all crazy dumping in the bathroom there, right? That is by far my least favorite way to dump a cassette toilet is in a home toilet. But there are lots and lots of options for dumping a cassette compared to dumping just a regular RV. Okay, one final way you can dump a cassette toilet if none of the other options work for you is you can try to tip it directly into a sewer cleanout. And I've done this a time or two. Always makes me a little nervous, like I'm gonna miss. So the way it works is you move the spout this way, you line up alongside, and then you just sort of tip it until that goes right into the sewer cleanout. And then you can just pick it up and dump it like normal. And that works okay as long as your aim is good. The second objection I hear frequently goes something like this, like, it's only 5 gallons. Oh my gosh, I'm going to wind up dumping that thing twice a day. And no, you won't. And here's why. It's because it's only 5 gallons and your habits will adapt to fit the toilet that you've got. So, you're always mindful of water use in an RV. With a cassette toilet, you're going to be a little more mindful of the water use. You always try to put less toilet paper in the toilet in the RV. In a cassette toilet, you're going to be even more mindful of that. In fact, we have a separate receptacle in the bathroom that we use for a lot of the toilet paper. Your habits will adapt. Now, I have heard of people that have gone like kind of overboard, I think, and they'll only use the cassette for absolute emergencies, or they'll only use the cassette for liquid waste or whatever. That, I think, is an overreaction. So Steph and I are on like 4 going on 5 years with a cassette toilet, and we use it exactly as we would use a regular toilet. We don't give a second thought about using the toilet at all. And using it that way, 2 well-hydrated adults, we wind up dumping it maybe every 2 to 2.5 days, okay? But you make up for it because there are so many more places to dump. Now, I have heard of people that bring along an extra cassette or 6. This isn't for this is for something else. An extra cassette or something. And we initially thought we might bring along an extra cassette, so I bought one, but we have never needed it in over 4 years. And again, why? It's because there are so many more places to dump, and it is such a fast ordeal. You don't have to break camp or anything like that. So the dumping thing, yes, you will have to deal with it more often, but it's less of an ordeal each time you do. And then the third objection I hear a lot is people worried about the potential for odors. But newsflash, you can have odors with a regular RV black tank too, or a cassette or a composting toilet even. They can all have odors if something's not working right. Now, it is true that in a cassette where you've got just like a 5-gallon compartment for the waste, there's a lot less air in there than there is in a 30-gallon black tank, say. So there's less air. And since you're emptying it more often, the waste isn't in there for as much time, so it doesn't have as much time to break down as in a large black tank. But all that means, really, in our experience, is that the choice of chemicals and the chemicals that you put into a cassette toilet in order to help break down the waste and control odors, that's a little bit more important with a cassette than it is for a regular RV black tank. And this is the thing we got wrong years ago when we tried a cassette type toilet. So you're going to really want to pay attention to your chemicals. Now, which chemical should you use? I don't know what to tell you there. If only someone was designing an experiment where they were going to test out toilet chemicals in a cassette toilet, that might be a helpful video. So that's just it, really. There's no reason to make the cassette any more complicated than that. But let's hear from you. Do you have a cassette toilet? If so, what has your experience been? Or are you one of those people that's firmly anti-cassette? And if so, did I address your concerns, or what did I forget that still got you on the fence? Or if you just have general questions or there's something you want to know about a cassette toilet, you can chime in with those too. There will be a post over on thefitrv.com that we will link down in the YouTube description below. You can pop on over there, ask questions, leave comments, and we'll do our best to get them answered. And that's going to do it. We'll see you later.